You're listening to the Greeks Gridiron. Now here's your host, Ethan Haristadoulou.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Greeks Gridiron. I am Ethan Haristadoulou, and welcome to another edition of UFL Picks. As we go through each and every single game this weekend, I'll dive in, break down the games, and ultimately give you all my winner and score prediction here. I invite you all to do the same in the comments section down below. Join in on the conversation. Let me know who you have in this week's matchups. Who do you think is going to come out victorious here? We have a pretty interesting schedule this weekend. We got 4 games, 3 of them slated for Saturday, 1 of them slated for Sunday, and 2 of the games on Saturday are playing at the same time. I'm going to be honest, not a big fan of how this whole thing worked out because it's going to come down to those games being broadcasted both on Fox, depending on where you live, is going to dictate which game you get of the 2 matchups, and we'll obviously get into that when we get to them, but not necessarily thrilled by the scheduling of this weekend, but it is what it is. What are you going to do? But starting with the first matchup, we're going to begin with the Saturday game at 12:30 p.m. Eastern time on ABC. Memphis Showboats taking on the St. Louis Battlehawks, this one being in St. Louis here. And for the Showboats, currently right now, offensively, bit of a mess. And as I kind of hammered about earlier this week, I'm kind of surprised given the amount of talent that they have on this team, from the players on the field to the coaches that they have on the sidelines here. They're currently ranked 7th in both rushing and passing right now, and have scored only 4 touchdowns so far this season, which is worst in the UFL in comparison to the 8 field goals that they've had to settle for, which is tied for first with a few other teams. They have got to find a way to put points on the board in a more efficient manner, and on top of that, they need to start running the football more effectively. That offensive line needs to get more aggressive at the point of attack here, averaging a measly 2.7 yards per carry. St. Louis is the 2nd ranked run defense in the UFL, averaging about 95 yards per game. So if there was ever a weekend to kind of get it together, or at least give it another honest effort and hope for some better results, this would be the week to do so. They did just allow over 100 yards and a couple of touchdowns to the Brahmas last weekend, allowing them to hit a season high of over 100 yards. So if there was ever a week to maybe get your run game together, going up against the Battlehawks might be the weekend to do so. Defensively, Memphis is kind of in a really tough spot here because they're a really solid run defense, and also on top of that, they have a defensive front that can get after the quarterback and create some problems here. They're able to bring down the quarterback, get those sacks. They have 9 in the season, which is tied for 2nd. However, they are allowing a whopping 243 yards per game through the air right now, which leads the league. So odds are in this matchup here against St. Louis, you're probably going to get lit up through the air. So it's going to be up to them to just bring that pressure and try to disrupt A.J. McCarron as much as possible and throw off that passing attack in any way that they can to hopefully just mitigate the damage that St. Louis is going to do. But if you're not able to do that, there is potential for this being a very, very long 60 minutes for Memphis and another loss in that loss column for them. As for the Battlehawks, I think for them offensively, it really just boils down to their protection of A.J. McCarron and how they fare in this matchup here. As I mentioned, the Memphis Showboats tied second, I should say, with a couple of teams as far as 9 sacks is concerned for them on the year. And with St. Louis having allowed 8 sacks, which is tied for 2nd most, taking care of A.J. McCarron and ensuring he has the time in the pocket to do what he does best, and that is deliver the football effectively, you have yourself a good shot to potentially put up some numbers here. Like, there is a good shot we see ourselves another 300-yard passing performance, and if it was going to be in any matchup this week, it would be this Showboats defense trying to stop St. Louis's passing attack. I'm also really interested in how St. Louis handles running the football here. Memphis ranks, as I said earlier, one of the best run defenses in the UFL right now, currently 2nd in terms of yards per game allowed. However, they are tied for 3rd most in yards per carry and tied for the lowest number of attempts against them. So there is a potential that the number is skewed a little bit just because of how many times teams have actually tried to run against them. And also on top of that, when teams run, they do average a pretty decent chunk of change, but it might have to do more so with the attempts and where these runs are being made within the game and things like that. There's a lot that can go into that type of stuff. So maybe that number is skewed, maybe it's not. That's one of those things I'll be interested in seeing because we have seen a little bit of an explosion from that running game in St. Louis. And then defensively, St. Louis has been very average to this point. 3 weeks in, it's hard to kind of assume where this team is, but through these 3 weeks, what we've seen, a really good performance in week 1, and then some meh performances, I would say, at best the last couple of weeks right now. When you look at the numbers, I mean, you're averaging 22 points a game, which puts you right in the middle of the league, 4th in yards per game, 4th in touchdowns allowed, very middle of the road, very average unit, is in like every sense of the word, basically. So for the Battlehawks, if they can just play a hair above average going up against a Showboats offense that, like I mentioned, has struggled to find the end zone, has settled a lot for field goals, lean into your passing attack, give A.J. McCarron the time, and I do think that this Battlehawks can come out victorious in this one, and they are the team that I have picked for the win here in this very first matchup of the weekend. I just have a really hard time buying what Memphis is doing offensively right now. I am genuinely concerned for what this team is going to look like over the next few weeks here, because they just cannot seem to get it together offensively. And again, the way this game matches up, at least on paper, there is a good reason to lean towards St. Louis in this matchup here. And I have them winning 25-22. I do think that Memphis maybe battles back a little bit, maybe against a little bit of a weaker St. Louis defense, finds a little bit more success offensively. Maybe they get a couple of touchdowns in this game here as opposed to what feels like a 1 per game average at this point. But ultimately, I do think that we get some points, but the Battlehawks passing attack just winds up being a little too much and takes advantage of Memphis, who just has a really hard time stopping teams through the air. Next matchup that we're going to look at here, we have ourselves. Like I said, we're looking at a doubleheader that's going to be happening at the same exact time. Both of these games are on Fox, and I'm not really a big fan of how this is working out. But the first one I'm going to discuss is the DC Defenders heading into Birmingham to take on the Stallions. DC Defenders come in at a surprising 2-1, I would say, based off some of the play we've got from them. But then the Birmingham Stallions, dominant spring football favorites, 3-0, and at this point look poised to potentially run through some teams over the next few weeks here. This one, Saturday as well, like I said, 7 p.m. Eastern time, as is the game coming up next after this one here. The Defenders come in defensively just a nightmare. And again, that's why I say that it's a little bit shocking to see them at 2-1, and maybe it has to do with the schedule and just who they've played so far, but they are 2-1, so credit where it is due. But defensively, it is not pretty, and you're going up against the Birmingham Stallions, and this is concerning. You are second most in yards per game allowed, third most in points per game allowed. You are tied for the most touchdowns allowed this season with 9. You're leading the league in most passing touchdowns allowed with 6. You struggle to generate pressure on defense with only 3 sacks, which is the least in the UFL. It is not pretty. The lone thing you can kind of take away from is that they're like an above average third down defense, which is like the one random good thing I could find that I was like, this is a nice thing to write home about. Offensively, it really doesn't get much better. On top of that, you're third lowest in yards per game, you're third lowest in points per game, you're third lowest in touchdowns scored. There is a lot of not good from the DC Defenders coming into this game here. And again, a bit of a surprise that they're 2-1, and it might just have to do with the way their schedule shook out to start the season here. When you flip over and you look at the Birmingham Stallions and just how they match up here, and this is even in my notes, like you would have an easier time talking about what the Stallions don't lead the league in offensively than what they do. I mean, first in yards per game, points per game, rushing yards per game, first in rushing touchdowns. They are the best first in terms of first downs first downs netted. I mean, there is just a ludicrous amount of numbers. And then if they're not in first, they're probably in second, like in passing yards per game, in sacks allowed per game, in third down conversion rate. It is a unit. And then the defense is no slouch either. And again, first in yards per game, first in rushing yards per game. They lead the league with 19 sacks, and they are well in front of whoever is in second place. Touchdowns allowed, only 3 on the season. They're allowing 1 touchdown per game currently at this moment here. They are tied for first in takeaways with 5, tied for first downs allowed so far this season, and I believe it's by like a solid double-digit number as well. The overall arching point that I have here is that the team records does not reflect what this matchup really is. You have a team that has kind of skirted by, and thanks to their schedule and the teams that they played against, going up against an absolute juggernaut that just decimated a division rival last week and has only had 1 really close game to this point here. I'm very concerned for what the defenders' output is going to be in this matchup here, and I genuinely hope I wind up being surprised, and I'm completely wrong about this, but this feels like a runaway type of game based off what we've seen from Birmingham and DC. I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to take the Stallions. Obvious choice here. I have them winning 36-10. It is not going to be a pretty game in my opinion. And again, I hope I'm wrong. I genuinely do, because I want good competitive football here. But you just lay everything out on the table the way I did when I was going through my prep work for this game here. And at no point was I even slightly convinced, maybe DC comes in and just like surprises everybody. There's just not enough there from DC and what I've seen from them so far this season to make me believe that they can stop. I don't even know who could actually stop the Birmingham Stallions at this point here, and I don't really think it's going to be DC. So it is what it is. At DC, good luck, but Birmingham Stallions by what feels like a million. Next matchup, as I stated, happening at the same exact time, 7 p.m. This one is on Fox as well. So again, depending on where you are in the region of the country will kind of determine how you're going to be getting your games here and who you're going to be able to watch, unless you know your way around the internet, like some of us do. But the Michigan Panthers head into San Antonio to take on the Brahmas. Both teams are 2-1 right now. Michigan obviously coming off of a massive performance over the Houston Roughnecks last week, and then the San Antonio Brahmas losing their quarterback Chase Garbers, and that's probably going to be the biggest question I have for them going into this matchup here, and honestly into the foreseeable future. How does San Antonio handle the loss of their starting quarterback, who has been nails for them at times this season? And I do think you handle that loss, obviously taking it in stride, but you lean into your ground attack. Coming off their best rushing performance last week against St. Louis, even though they lost that game, I do think you want to lean into your ground attack just a little bit more so you can take advantage of controlling the game some more. I feel like with the way San Antonio has worked, they're very big play centric, and they don't take up enough time on the clock doing what they do. Their opponent's time of possession is very high. It's in the top half of the UFL, and it feels like they're very, it's like very hit or miss, boom or bust type of plays here. A lot of their scoring has come off of massive plays, and I do think that it would serve them well to maybe slow things down a bit, control the football a little bit more, and maybe focus on the running game. And when you look at Michigan, they're ranked 6th against the run so far this season. Last week's opponent, St. Louis, being ranked 7th. You have a good opportunity to match that 100 and so yards, couple of touchdowns that you had last week in that loss to St. Louis there. And I think by doing so, it'll help open things up for Quinton Dormady, and you have yourself a more balanced offense going forward. Defensively, you have one goal, in my opinion, if you're San Antonio, and that is to try to bring as much pressure as possible, disrupt what EJ Perry wants to do, because I think at this point it is very clear if you make the pocket messy, EJ Perry can be pressured into making poor decisions, which ultimately lead to turnovers, which can cost the Panthers, the game. So I do think with 9 sacks on the season, you're coming into this game, you believe in your defensive front, and you want to see another 2 or 3 sacks with another 4, 5, or 6 hurries against the quarterback in that pocket, make things messy, force EJ Perry to maybe throw into a window that's a little bit tighter than he anticipated it being, that might close a little bit faster than he anticipated it closing, and force him into those errors, because we have seen that it is doable, and we've seen, you look at last week, what happens when you give him all the time that he needs to be able to make the plays that he's able to make. For the Panthers defensively, I think just making Quinton Dormady have to beat you with his arm is probably a good route to go. Despite the struggles that I mentioned about defending the run as far as Michigan is concerned here, I do think you have an opportunity to maybe, hold San Antonio off. They're not necessarily the greatest rushing attack in the UFL right now, and for my point on them, it's more so about them maybe taking advantage of a weaker run defense. But if you can make them one-dimensional and put Quinton Dormady into a spot where he has to beat you with his arm, I think you have a really good shot of disrupting this offense and coming away with the win. They're allowing the second lowest yards per game in terms of passing, and they have allowed only 3 passing touchdowns this season, so they can make it difficult against their opponents' passing attacks. They've showed it so far this season. You can even look at their performance going up against the Birmingham Stallions a couple of weeks ago. This defense is legit in Michigan. Offensively, back to the point that I made with San Antonio, I think it, on the flip side here, I keep punching my mic over here right now. The point remains, you need to protect EJ Perry. It is imperative for them to be able to have a successful offense, in my opinion. If you can protect him, it gives him the time to make those good decisions, and this offense can clearly thrive when he has the opportunity to make those good decisions here. I think you need to look no further than the connection he has with wide receiver Marcus Mims right now. I mean, deep play threat. The guy has 9 catches so far this season, but he's second in the league as far as yardage goes right now. He's averaging like 24 yards per catch or something ludicrous right now. So give him the time he needs. Offensive line needs to look good. It'll help open up those big plays, give you the opportunity to take those big shots down the field and put the ball in your playmakers' hands. And the other thing I'm looking at here, going up against San Antonio, who's ranked 5th right now in the UFL in terms of yards per game allowed on the ground, don't be afraid to hand the football off to your running backs. You might not have had the success that I think some people, even myself included, were anticipating, given the running back room that you have right now of Matt Colburn and Wes Hills, and whether that has to do maybe with just the offensive line having a hard time opening up those running lanes. Whatever the issue may be, don't be afraid to lean into them and run the football. Like I said, San Antonio, they're a very aggressive defense, and I do think it ends up opening up running lanes because of that. And the way they're so just like ears pinned back and go up front that I think you can kind of take advantage of that aggressiveness with like delayed run options and things like that. Just, forcing EJ Perry to maybe hang on to the ball for a second or two longer before he hands it off to the running back. And you could maybe take advantage of what is such an overly aggressive front in San Antonio. And we've seen them kind of get burned by that. I think we saw it last week against St. Louis as well. That being said, as for who I think comes out victorious in this matchup here, 2-1 teams. I think this one will be a really fun one. I think it's very competitive. It'll probably come down to the very finish as well. I don't think there's a lot separating these teams right now. And really the big X factor of this whole game is just how San Antonio handles that loss of Chase Garbers. And I do think it is something that maybe causes them to stumble a little bit. So I'm leaning Michigan in this matchup here. I do have them taking the win. But again, tight contest, 24-19. I don't think it's a runaway by any means. I think this one ends up being closer. San Antonio has been a pretty good defense to this point. Obviously, last week was a lone example so far of the defense not being too great, but overall, San Antonio has had a really good defense, so I think they can at least slow down Michigan, but ultimately, I do think I'm siding Panthers on this one. And then last, but certainly not least, the game that everyone is looking forward to, myself included, the Battle of the Beaten. Someone comes home with a victory this week. There are no ties in the UFL. We have the 0-3 Arlington Renegades going into Houston to take on the Roughnecks, who themselves are 0-3. Somebody has to come out victorious in this game here. Looking at the Renegades, defensively, they have got to wake up. If they weren't last in what feels like nearly every single defensive category, this team has the opportunity of maybe looking at like 2-1 as opposed to being 0-3. But alas, they're not. And they have one of the worst defenses in the UFL, arguably even the worst defense in the UFL after losing to DC last weekend. Who knows? The debate is certainly there. You decide that. In my opinion, I'd say they're probably at least second worst. Thankfully, you're facing Houston. Offense has been struggling, dealt with a quarterback injury, and at this point, I don't really know if Reed Sinnett is going to light the world on fire in Houston, and it sounds like we're also going to see Nolan Henderson, I think is what his name is. Excuse me if I'm getting that one wrong there. I forgot to go back and double check on his name here, but I believe it's Nolan Henderson, or Henderson. I might be making that up, but you're going up against an offense that is in a bit of a bind right now, and they don't really have a lot going well for them. They are one of the more inefficient units in the UFL. Arlington's offense, being one of the better units in the UFL, has the opportunity to just maybe dump some points on the board, hopefully kind of put the Roughnecks in the same situation that the Panthers did last week, where the offense just kind of got so overwhelming and the Houston Roughnecks offense just not really doing a whole lot, put them in a situation where they ran out of gas early, and Michigan just, I feel like they noticed that and just like stomped on the gas and were just like, all right, keep going, keep putting points on the board, like do not look back, just go, go, go. And I think Arlington has the makings to be able to do that same exact type of thing here. With only 2 turnovers this season, they are one of the most efficient units as far as taking care of the football is concerned. You're second in offensive yards. You are the number one passing attack in the UFL, third lowest in sacks allowed. This is a unit that can start to really take advantage of a defense that's on its heels, and I think Arlington has a really good opportunity to do something similar to what Michigan did to them last week. For the Roughnecks, as I mentioned, consistency in moving the football has not been great, and per head coach Curtis Johnson, there is some potential light at the end of what has been a very dark offensive tunnel. Running back Mark Thompson has been practicing this week, and it sounds like there is some hope that he could suit up and potentially play. I'm assuming if he does, there might be some sort of a snap count. Maybe he's full go. We'll see. I know everyone in Houston is anxiously awaiting his arrival, and I'm here for it as well. I would love to see Mark Thompson suit up and get some snaps under him and maybe return to the form that we saw from him dominating last season. But even with that positive, I don't quite know if the offensive line is up for the task. I mean, they're averaging 48 yards per game right now and 3.2 yards per carry, which are both towards, well, yards per game is at the worst in the UFL, second worst for the yards per carry number. I don't know if adding a singular running back is going to completely change that number. Maybe it opens things up a little bit more. Maybe it even helps in the passing game because teams have to account for Mark Thompson. But there is just so much concern around what is happening with this team offensively for me right now that I don't know if I can pin all my hopes on the return of Mark Thompson completely turning around what they've got going on over there offensively. Defensively, I love the Roughnecks. I think they are one of the more dominating units. It's just they need to be given some time to take breaks, and the offense can't just be fumbling away or, going 3 and out or maybe moving 5 to 6 plays at most before sending the defense back out on the football field. I mean, this is a team that, against the run, they are one of the best units in the UFL. They've been credited with 32 runs for a loss, which leads the league right now. I mean, that defensive front led by Reuben Foster is just, it's an absolute monster, and they're tough to work against here. And ultimately, beyond that, I don't know, man. It's tough. I'm somebody that roots for the Roughnecks. I want to see them succeed, and it's hard because it's a team you want to heap praise on and, look at the positives, but there's really not a whole lot there to go for. And I'm kind of worried about how this team's secondary is going to handle an Arlington team that, again, is very good at throwing the football here. They're going to need to find a way to generate more pressure. They only have 5 sacks so far this season, so they're going to have to be able to dial it up, go after Luis Perez, and create some havoc for them. But I just don't quite know, based off what kind of felt like a bit of a collapse last week, if Houston's going to have it in the tank to be able to pull out the victory here. And with that being said, I am leaning Arlington in this matchup here. I think that Arlington's defense is potentially poor enough that maybe Houston finds some success, but as a team that is worst in the UFL in terms of points per game right now, Houston's not even averaging 17 points a game at this point, and I have a hard time seeing them put up anything more than that because when they went up against the DC Defenders just a couple of weeks ago, that didn't even really help them out. And there's a very strong argument that DC has the worst defense in the UFL right now, and even then they struggle to put up a decent point total there. So I'll take Arlington. I have them winning 23-18. Should be an interesting matchup to say the least, but we finally will have ourselves a win column for either the Renegades or the Roughnecks. Somebody has to win. Again, there's no ties in the UFL, and I'll be looking forward to seeing who comes out in the Battle of the Beatons. But that is it for me. If you made it to the very end, I greatly appreciate it. As always, comment down below. Let me hear your picks, your thoughts on my picks, and all of that and more. But if you made it to the end, thank you all. I'll see you all next time. Have a good one.